Well, I think the easiest thing to do here is to focus on the ISNULL and coalesce side of things. I just want to show you that example that we used before. Plus middle name. And why isn't it prompting me with anything useful? Because I have not defined the table name. Remember, that's why we'll often go ahead and put the from clause in there so we can come back and get what we expect. Remember, this was our example code. I'll tell you what I'll do. I'll go ahead and I'll get the middle name and last name. And like I almost always do, anytime I have an expression, I like to put it on a separate line. So let me just go ahead and execute this. Sorry for some screenshots earlier. I was doing that, so I'll put that back in the grid. Okay, so nothing really surprising. The key points to note is when you had a null anywhere, whether it was first, last, or middle, the result was a null, right? The result of an unknown plus Catherine is an unknown string. Okay. Let's now talk about ISNULL and coalesce. And I'm going to actually break this apart into two videos because I want to give you the overview of using them and get you comfortable with that. But then I want to come back and make you mad at using them. Maybe that's not the right way to put it, but they will frustrate you, man. I don't know of a set of functions that can be more frustrating than ISNULL and coalesce. I don't know. It doesn't make sense, and trust me, I'll show you here. Okay, so let's talk syntax here. So ISNULL, you pass in argument 1 and argument 2, and coalesce. Let's do, just give me a second to write these out. I'll show you what argument 1, what I mean, and all that. Argument 1, argument 2. Looks the same, right? However, coalesce can have argument 3, and I'm going to put brackets over here because this is our optional. You can have argument 4, argument 5, okay. Additional arguments, and actually my bracket technically would go right there. What the brackets would infer would be optional. Okay, so arguments 1 and 2 are required. However, if you want to pass the other ones in, you can, but they are optional arguments. Okay, so let's just start with the idea that ISNULL and coalesce do the same thing. They perform the same function. They do exactly the same thing. Okay? However, coalesce accepts more arguments. Now, let's put this into practice here. Let's say, here's how I can think of them. Here's the easiest way I can explain them. They're like inline if statements. Okay, so if argument 1 is null, return argument 2. Else, return argument 1. And, I guess I could if you really want me to put an end if there. But that's really what it's like. Either one of these, I don't care which one you use, they have the same goal. They run through basically this pseudocode here. If the first argument you pass in is null, then it returns the second argument. Or else, it returns argument 1. Okay? Now, the only difference that you can see so far, we haven't fully developed this, is that coalesce doesn't stop here, right? So only for ISNULL, and I did it, ISNULL, okay? Right? It only allows you to do this. There are no additional arguments. However, coalesce, you could say, you can kind of change this up, if we're using coalesce, else if argument 2 is null, return argument 3. You see, it's allowing you to go and do additional tests. Else if argument null is 2, argument 2 is null. This is, it's, just stop with these. This is easier to consider for the time being. Let's actually put it in play here. I'm going to come back up here and I'm just going to copy and paste. And I want to now replace a null middle name with an empty string. Or how about we replace it with an asterisk? We'll do that first, and then we'll deal with the idea of the empty string. So what's my syntax then if I want to replace? And I want to use, I'll challenge you here, I want to use the transact SQL specific one. So which one of these two is T-SQL? And which one is the ISO standard? Right, there's your T-SQL one. So I say is null the expression or column that I want to test to see if it is null. And if it is null, I want to replace it with an asterisk. And I'll go ahead and bring this as full name too. Okay. So what it's going to do is it's going to say if middle name is null, return asterisk. Else return middle name. And so now you can see over here full name too, it put the asterisk in instead of bringing back the null. I'm trying to bring that right there. Very cool. Dig that? Okay, so now let's change it up. I don't want the asterisk returned. I want an empty string return. How much space do I have? Not much. So I'll do it here. So instead of an asterisk, do I just remove the asterisk and it returns an empty string? Will that do it? Well, the issue here is yes, it does. But look carefully at the spacing between Orlando N and Keith H. This is one space, but this is actually two spaces. And if you go back to your expression that you had, remember, this is your whole expression, notice that you were concatenating a space with an empty string with a space. So what do we need to do? Doesn't matter which side you do. I'll pick this side. What is the result of an empty string plus an unknown string? Unknown, right? So if we encounter a middle name, a single space character plus an unknown string equates or evaluates to null, right? So once we do this, then it comes back with the right thing. So you have to make sure that you put in the correct expression to your is null when you're doing things like this. Okay. Now let's do it again with coalesce. Let me show you what I mean. Coalesce. Okay. There you go. Same exact results, right? There is no difference between them syntactically when you only have two arguments. There's going to be another, at least one difference that we have to highlight. But again, next video, all I want you really doing right now is just getting comfortable with the idea of the syntax of is null and coalesce. Now, let's take a look at, coming over here, we're going to take a look at the sales order header table. And the reason that I picked this one, if you remember from one of our earlier exercises, we had several columns that were nullable. And so what I'm going to do now, I want to play. I want to have a little bit of fun with this. So here's what I'm going to come down here and do. I'm going to make a problem statement. Let's just take a look at all the rows. Actually, I'm going to make a problem statement first here. So return order info if, and I'm just going to pick some columns here. If the purchase order number, PO number, matches to the purchase order number, is null, return the account number. Unless it is null, if account number is null, what can we return? Return the credit card. I'll put that on a separate line. Approval code. I know, kind of silly. Right? I mean, these are not necessarily ones that you would go together, right? So if the purchase order is null, return the account number. But if the account number is null, return the credit card approval code. Okay, so now you kind of get into a case. Do you want to use ISNULL or do you want to use COALESCE? This is the perfect time to use COALESCE. And how about this? Finally, if the credit card approval code is null, return unknown, the literal value. Okay? This isn't really something you want to do with is null. Let's just show it here. Let's get the sales order ID. Again, let me go ahead and put the table in. We'll get that. Move this over here. H dot credit card, no, purchase order we wanted. H dot account and H dot credit card approval code. And then here's our column, our order info. On an older syntax, you can actually say order info equal. So you are, instead of using as order info, you're defining the header of the column before you define the expression. This is a bad syntax, but you might see it out there. So I'll show it to you. So I'm going to use COALESCE, and I'm going to just start typing things in. H dot purchase order. Wonder why it's not. Oh, it doesn't like the syntax. It broke the IntelliSense. I'll just take it out because I want to use my IntelliSense. H dot account number, H dot credit card approval code. How about copy and paste? We're going right, and no. Okay. So you can see now where these extra arguments come into play. It's like an if statement. If purchase order is null, look at the account number. If the account number is not null, return the account number, stop processing, go on to the next row. However, if the account number is null, then check the credit card approval code. Is the credit card approval code null? Yes, then return unknown. Else, return credit card approval code. Like, that's one of the biggest uses of this COALESCE function here. Okay? And I honestly don't know the data in this one. There we can see credit card approval code. However, we have purchase order numbers for everyone. Close your eyes here. Don't watch yet. I'll tell you when to open. 3. So and we'll get you. Okay. Now, so we actually do have a couple of situations here. So in our test, it actually does do this in line. It's going to test first the purchase order number. If the purchase order number is not null, then it returns the purchase order number, right? So looking at our order info, you can see it brought back the purchase order number. Same thing here, not null, so it's just bringing it back. However, eventually we get down to one where I kind of made it happen. We look at the purchase order number. It is null. So we then look at the account number, and that's what it gets brought back. All right. And then I realize now that I need to also set the purchase order equal null for that one. Sorry. And rerun this. So we get to another one, the very next one, that has both a null purchase order number, then the account number is null, then the credit card approval code is null, and so it does what we call falls through. So it tested every one of these, and then we got to the else. We fell all the way through and got to the unknown. Now here's a question for you. What if I left this one out? What if that was left out? What is now going to be the value of the order info when all three of our options evaluate to null? Null, right? You didn't put a hard-coded or a non-nullable piece in here. So the result is this was null, so it tested that. That was null, so it returned that, which was also a null. So it is often seen when you're working with Coalesce that the last one is a hard-coded, or at the very least a non-nullable expression like a column that is required. Okay. Final little bit here. Sorry to make this video long, but I want to tie all of these three up in a single video. Let's talk about dealing with NULLIF, because I want to get this one done in this video. NULLIF converts knowns to unknowns. Okay? So, like, I'll give you an example. So I'll say NULLIF null. Let's see if a 0 equals 0. Okay? So I pass in two known values, 0 and 0. I'll explain. And look what it does. It returns a null. However, if I pass in this, it doesn't. Okay? Let's talk about what this is. If argument 1 equals argument 2, return null. Else, return argument 1. That's what NULLIF says. So does 0 equal 4? No. So it returns 0, argument 1. However, when we had 0 and 0, if 0 equals 0, it returns null. You're probably going, what? Why would I? All right, let me show you. Okay. What is the return of this statement? What is 1 divided by 0? We get a divide by 0 error, right? Okay, how about if I did this? NULLIF. If 0 equals 0, I want you to make it null. Here we have an expression. What is this going to evaluate to? Up here. If argument 1, 0, equals argument 2, 0, return null. One side of this is going to evaluate to null. What then is 1 divided by an unknown number? An unknown number, right? So now instead of getting a divide by 0 error, we get a null value. And okay, now here's my rule of thumb. Here's when I use NULLIF most of the time. Use NULLIF any time a divisor can be 0. Okay? Like for example, I'll show you here. Let's get the total due column, the subtotal, and let's take a look at those. And I'll show you like this subtotal. Okay? There's one that's a 0. And so what I want now is get the ratio of subtotal to total due. So if I want to do that, I'll take the total due divided by the subtotal. And I get a divide by 0 error because one of them was a 0. Notice that it ran the query up until the point where it found a subtotal that was 0. And I'll put my expression on a separate line and comment it out. Just to show you again, it ran all of this stuff up until it found this. Okay, you can't divide 11 by 0. Okay, you're going to get a divide by 0 error. Okay? Now, I could do this. Okay, right? Okay, and then my ratios right over here say that, it's somewhere around this point. Okay? However, then that doesn't include every order. We are now missing an order. So here's what I can do. I can wrap a NULLIF around the subtotal. If it equals 0, return a null value. And what is a total unknown divided by an unknown? An unknown. Scroll down. Everything's looking good until we get here. Okay? If 0 equals 0, then return null. And what is 11.1868 divided by null? It's a null. Now, what if you wanted to, I'll show you this. How about this? What if I actually wanted it to display 1? Because that's the ratio. Or if I wanted it to display the total due. I could wrap is null. If this expression evaluates to null, I want you to return the total due. And what's the total due divided by itself? Then it would return to 1. Or another alternative over here would have been to wrap the is null around the whole expression. Sorry. It just depends on what you want to display. So I now want it to say total due. Now let me explain this one here. So these are actually different. They'll come up with different results here if one of the sides is null, if the subtotal is a 0. You can see it's the same when we have two knowns, but when we have that unknown over here, then we get two different answers. And let's talk about this. The is null only operates on the subtotal test in this example. If this expression equals a 0, so we would actually divide by 0, we want to make it null. Okay? But then we want to convert that null to the total due. So then the total result of the expression is, for this one, total due divided by total due. Okay, for that row. Over here, it's 3293 divided by 2980 because subtotal was not equal 0, therefore it was not null, and it simply sent back the subtotal. Gosh, that's fast. That's a lot, I know. Down here, though, it takes this whole expression. Okay? Total due divided by subtotal, unless subtotal is 0, and when the subtotal is 0, divide it by null. What's 11.1868 divided by an unknown number? Unknown number, right? And so then, if that does result in a null, return the total due. Whew, wipe your head, wipe your brow. That's some brutal work right there. Okay, let's stop this one. Let's come back in the next one, and we'll deal with some other problems.